Good evening, one and all present here. Welcome to the Xavier Center of Historical Research, online history hour, remembering Maria Aurora Couto. We have gathered here to pay our respects and honor to Sri Maria Aurora Couto, who has been an inspiration to all, be it in person, her zest for intellectual pursuit, and her contributions to literature. We have 5 speakers amidst us who would be sharing about Maria Aurora Couto, and the speakers are Ms. Shreya Pinto de Andrade, Mr. Manohar Shetty, Professor Shushila Mendes, Mr. Datta Naik, and Mr. Vivek Meneses. Father Tony will share the history hour today. I would like to give a few instructions with regards to the history hour.
Vivek.
First.
Speaking, Shreya.
I'm sorry, I am hearing a lot of interruptions. So that's why the first instruction is kindly mute your mics and turn off your videos when this history is presented. Only the speakers, the 5 speakers, when their turn comes in to speak, they will turn on their videos and they will be speaking. Other than that, all of us, including myself, we have to turn off our videos and turn off our mics. Please comply. The second instruction is that one minute. The second point is kindly do not interrupt, because this is remembering Maria Aurora Couto, and that's why we have 5 speakers. This is not a time to question or have clarifications. If you have anything, if you have any messages, you can kindly put in the chat box. So I would repeat again, kindly do not interrupt. So I would give an alternative, that is, if you have any comments, if you have anything, put it in the chat box only. And lastly, I would say that the history hour is being recorded, and since we are having this in honor of Maria Aurora Couto, this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Having said all this, I now like to invite the director of Xavier's Center of Historical Research, Father Anthony da Silva, to take charge. Over to you, Father Tony.
Good evening to all of you. Can you hear me in the first place?
Yes, we can hear you, Father. Father Tony, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you. We at XCHR are pleased that you have decided to join this virtual history hour of the Xavier Center, during which we intend to remember and honor Maria Aurora Couto, both as a noble human being as well as an outstanding scholar. Though her richly acclaimed book, Goa, A Daughter's Story, portrays Maria Aurora as a daughter of Goa, her story has a far wider reach. In fact, it is universal. Although Maria Aurora emerged from the shady coconut palms and sandy coastlines of Goa, ultimately she lived in multiple cultures and countries and loved these national and international experiences. She was truly a daughter of the world. My acquaintance with Dr. Aurora Couto is of recent vintage. I trace it back to a phone call 2 years ago. She then wished to talk to the director of Xavier Center to share the news that after a family deliberation, she had arrived at a decision to donate her entire book collection to Xavier Center. As you can imagine, such news is joyful, but a bit awesome too. I had never met Dr. Aurora, though I had heard much about her and about her recent books and other literary achievements. During several charming meetings at her home in Aldona, I got to know Maria Aurora more closely and enjoy her vast knowledge of things literary, cultural, and spiritual. She crossed boundaries and barriers with ease and had the unique ability to synthesize ideas and insights. She possessed a sort of universal soul. Her books and literary contributions are a testimony to this. The Xavier Center is therefore deeply grateful to Dr. Maria Aurora Couto and the entire family, especially the three children, Veena, Vivek, and Vinay. Father Anderson and his team worked closely with Veena as we transferred the books from Aldana to Porvorim. We have now dedicated a section of our library to this invaluable collection of books on Goa, on English literature, and on culture. The transfer of books is still ongoing, while those already transferred are now available to scholars and readers at XCHR. Dr. Aurora's great wish was that knowledge and learning be disseminated among the people of Goa and India through her rich and unique collection. May her spirit now continue to inspire a new generation of scholars. Having briefly reflected over our relationship with Dr. Maria Aurora, I would like to conclude my little reflection by sharing with you or by reading out to you a poem from Rabindranath Tagore. We all know that Tagore was one of the favorite authors and poets of Maria Aurora. And so this is a poem I have chosen, which I think reflects very well the spirit and the spiritual attitudes of Dr. Maria Aurora. I will read it to you in a prayerful manner, in a reflective manner, so that all of us can enjoy this poem of Tagore and recall to mind the greatness and the beauty of the life of Dr. Maria Aurora Couto. Thou hast made known to friends whom I knew not. Thou hast given me seats in homes not my own. Thou hast brought the distant near and made a brother of the stranger. I am uneasy at heart when I have to leave my accustomed shelter. I forget that there abides the old in the new, and that there also thou abidest. Through birth and death, in this world or in others. Wherever thou leadest me, it is thou, the same, the one companion of my endless life, whoever linkest my heart with bonds of joy to the unfamiliar. When one knows thee, then alien there is none. Then no door is shut. Oh, grant me my prayer, that I may never lose the bliss of the touch of the one in the play of the many. We just pause for a few moments to reflect on this poem of Tagore. We shall now continue with our program, and we shall have the 5 speakers share with us their experiences with Dr. Aurora. As Father Malcolm explained to you in the beginning, we have carefully invited these 5, we have chosen them naturally and invited them because we believe they have something unique to share with us about Dr. Aurora, and thus both enlighten us and enrich us with their memories and with their tributes. The first speaker this evening is Ms. Shreya Pinto de Andrade. She is the granddaughter, I think the oldest grandchild of Maria Aurora Couto through her daughter Veena Couto. Shreya currently works in a research and consulting firm in Goa and resides in Porvorim. Shreya says she was deeply inspired by the life of her grandmother. Especially she's touched by her grandmother's empathy and rationality. It made her grandmother, she says, the person she was. Her mind, her grandmother's mind, was deeply analytical, but it was her kindness and deep faith in God that she said governed all her decisions. Insight for us from Ms. Shreya Pinto, and now I hand over the mic to Ms. Shreya Pinto to speak for herself.
Thank you, Father Tony, and I hope I'm audible.
Very audible.
Okay. Thank you, Father Tony, and thank you everyone for attending. I'd also like to thank the Xavier Center, Father Tony and Father Malcolm for organizing this tribute. I think it's such a lovely way to remember my grandmother, to reflect on her life, all that she's done, and just kind of think about fond memories and have everybody come together and congregate, people who knew her, people who possibly didn't, and just to reflect on her life. So I think this is very beautiful and lovely, and thank you for doing it. I'd also like to thank the speakers who've agreed to speak. Thank you very much for doing this. I believe we all have different experiences and aspects of her life that we'd like to share, and I think it would contribute to a very kind of holistic understanding of the person she was. So thank you, everyone. In the days leading up to the session, after Father Tony called me and said, asked me if I'd like to speak, my first reaction was, definitely I'm so grateful for this opportunity. But then as I sat to write down, what exactly I'd like to say, I was overcome and a little overwhelmed because I wasn't sure how to capture all of what, my grandmother meant to us as a family and also to me. But what I was grateful to have to think about was the fact that over the last 2 years during the pandemic, one of the few good things about the pandemic, since I'd moved back to Goa, I got to spend a lot of time with her as an adult. And, we had a different set of conversations. The conversations were more mature. We sat and chatted about history, politics, her life, her experiences, my goals and aspirations. And I think back to those conversations and I think about the life lessons and the experiences that I derived from those and think those are kind of invaluable and something that I'll cherish for the rest of my life and keep going back to as, I progress through life and possibly encounter difficulties. So I'm forever grateful for those experiences. I've always felt a very deep sense of admiration for Nani, as I called her. Who I believe, who achieved all that she did amidst what I believe were extremely difficult circumstances, some of which she's written about in Philomena's journeys. She, as everybody probably knows, she was an academic who later became a writer. And I think it was an incredible accomplishment and sort of a testament to her resilience that, she developed and sort of retained through the rest of her life, that kind of pushed her to be as determined and hardworking as she was, and and helped her achieve all that she did. And I asked her if it was also, the sense of ambition that pushed her to be as hardworking and as resilient. But she said no, it wasn't a sense of ambition. It was just a sort of tacit commitment to the people that she said that she was, teaching or writing for. She always stressed that, commitment and sort of honor, you're honoring your word to do the best you can possibly do and to deliver the best you can was, one of the most important things in life, and that one should always kind of live up to that. This commitment to always push yourself to do the best you can also made its way into her family life and her personal life, where I think she was immense in the way that she balanced, her life. My mother describes Nani as being a very loving and very present mother, and the instance that she talks about specifically is how much care and effort Nani put into planning meals for everyone, planning meals for her children and her family, and it kind of went on into how she was as a grandmother as well, where she it makes me smile because I think of how we used to discuss meals and how she used to be so thoughtful to plan what she wanted to prepare. So one of my she'd ask me what my favorite dishes were and then kind of prepare those whenever I'd come to see her. So that comes back to me now. And I always used to say that, I find it fantastic about how you managed to balance everything. And she said that it's not something that came out of her own effort. It was also out of her own effort, but she said that it had a lot to do with with immense faith in God, and and kind of relying on a support system. So she relied on the support of her husband, her sisters, and her friends to be sounding boards, be people that she went to for advice and talk to, because she said you can never kind of be in isolation. You always have to have people to run ideas by, discuss things, make sure that you're making the right decisions, and kind of forge on with that confidence. So that was something I learned from her. And as I sit and listen to these tributes and read the tributes that have come in since she's passed, I am filled with an immense sense of gratitude, because I see all that she's achieved, some of which I wasn't even aware of. And I think about all of these achievements and think that in spite of all of this, she was to us, to my cousins and I, only ever what we needed her to be, which was, this loving and sort of grandmother who doted on us. And she never let her achievements become a baggage for us, something that we had to live up to. She always, kind of quietly advised us and was sort of a mentor in the way that she wanted us to, be as happy and fulfilled as we possibly could in whatever we chose to do. So I'm extremely grateful for that. And I look back at all of these experiences and lessons that she shared with me. And I think I almost think about it as like a goldmine of information and things that I can look back on. And I feel like equipped with these tools and this information, I think life will be okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again for attending, and thank you to all the speakers. And thank you, Father Tony. Back to you.
Thank you, Shreya. That was a lovely sharing. And also it helps us to understand Dr. Aurora as a person, as a grandmother, in fact, and her contribution to the family.
Yes, thank you, Father Tony.
You're welcome. We will now move on to the next speaker, and that is Mr. Manohar Shetty. Mr. Manohar Shetty is, of course, well known particularly in Goa, but he's beyond Goa also. He's a poet. He's published several books of poems, including Full Disclosure, New and Collected Poems from 1981 to 2017. Speaking Tiger is another, besides which he has also published Ferry Crossing, Short Stories from Goa. Mr. Shetty has also been a Homi Bhabha Fellow and a Raza Foundation Fellow, as well as a Fellow of the Sahitya Akademi. He says he knew, when I talked with him, he's told me he knew Dr. Aurora for several years. As a person, he says she was very kind and not given to simply patronizing younger writers, but encouraging them in a gentle manner. In her passing, Goa has truly lost a daughter, but she has left behind a rich legacy of writing, which will be read for many years to come. With these few words of introduction to Mr. Manohar Shetty, I hand over the mic to him. You got your video on?
I'd seen him present.
Yeah.
It's come, it's come.
Are you unmuted?
Yeah, say yes.
Yes,
Then you can speak. Please speak.
I can speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for having me here. I can't see myself, but that's fine. I haven't had the privilege of reading Aurora's book on Graham Greene, an author I've admired when Aurora knew, an author whom Aurora knew personally and hosted him in a house in Aldona. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me, no? Okay. I haven't had the privilege of reading Aurora's book on Graham Greene, an author I've admired, whom Aurora knew personally and hosted him in a home in Aldona. The other two, Goa, A Daughter's Story, and Philomena's Journey, The Portrait of a Family and a Culture, I have read with great interest. Both are intimately autobiographical in nature. Philomena's Journey is a testimony to the grit and courage of her mother.
We will go on to the next speaker because we are having some technical difficulties with Mr. Manohar Shetty's connection. The next speaker is Dr. Shushila Mendes. She's an author, she is professor of history, and she's also a well-known lecturer in Goa and other places, both nationally and internationally. She knew Dr. Aurora Couto, she said, when she was delighted that she agreed to write the foreword of her book. And then she also shared sometimes the speaking platform with Dr. Aurora. And she remembers particularly an incident at Xavier Center History Hour. After she had spoken, Dr. Aurora said of her, "My God, if you are such a good speaker, you must be a very good teacher." This one-line validation, says Dr. Shushila, instilled more confidence in me than I ever imagined. In later years, Dr. Shushila and her husband, Advocate Cleofato Almeida Coutinho, would visit Dr. Aurora in Aldana, and they exchanged a lot of news, obviously, about Goa. But Dr. Aurora was very keen to learn more about South Goa, from where Dr. Shushila comes. And so they had an opportunity to share with them a lot of this information about village or rural life in South Goa. So she is very happy that Dr. Shushila is, that she can share with us a few of her memories and her impressions of Dr. Aurora. Welcome, Dr. Shushila.
Respected Father Tony, Father Malcolm, fellow speakers, and friends and admirers of Dr. Maria Aurora Couto, thank you, Xavier Center of Historical Research, for this opportunity of paying my respect to a woman that I consider a woman of substance. Shreya, you had an awesome grandmother. She was also an awesome wife, mother, academician, author, and above all, Goa's daughter. I say awesome because of a small incident I was witness to at the Kosambi Memorial Lecture Series. Mrs. Couto was at the mic on stage, while Mr. Alban Couto was in the audience with his mouth half open, staring at his wife. I remember my friend Prashanti Talpankar calling me to see him, admiring his wife. And she said, he does it very often. Later, when we teased him about it, he simply said, isn't she beautiful? Isn't she graceful? Doesn't she speak eloquently? To think that theirs was a relationship of over 40 years. And at that point of time, it was a poignant moment for the rest of us. They were both made for each other in intellect, in spirit, and above all, their love for Goa. A supportive relationship, a partnership that lasted 48 years. It must have been her husband's encouragement that she attempted and completed her PhD at the age of 43 years, 19 years after marriage, and with 3 kids, and then went on to publish her first book, honed out of her doctoral thesis. I once read that her research was on Graham Greene, on his novels, and her husband faithfully brought her every copy of his subsequent novels and autographed it with the line, I hope it is his last novel. I'm fed up of sharing you with him. She had a very humorous and witty man as a husband for sure. As she writes in her own book, he often made fun that she belonged to the poorer section of the stately Albuquerque mansion at Loturi. This quality of supporting each other, they passed on to their supporting their family, their friends, and even their mooncalves. My husband Cleofato and I visited them periodically in their ancestral house in Aldona. The discussions were very enriching as we shared our life's experiences. Sadly, the pandemic robbed us of these lovely sittings in more recent times. I remember both of them informing my lawyer husband how the law was subverted when they gifted their land to a munkar as he had requested for an access to his house, and how without informing them, he sold their gifted land for a big sum of money to a builder. Mr. and Mrs. Couto were givers. They chose to give to Goa and retire in their ancestral house in Aldona, and both wanted to do something for Goa. Mrs. Couto offered her honorary services in whatever way she could to be of service to Goa and Goans. She was a member of the Executive Council of Goa University. She was instrumental in organizing the Kosambi Memorial Lectures, which she christened as the Festival of Ideas. She felt it important that Goa University institute the Kosambi Memorial Chair and invite speakers of repute to the university campus. She also offered, in memory of her beloved husband, a prize for the short stories at the Fundação Orient, and so much more, too long a list to write here. Dr. Couto and I shared common views on history as also issues related to Goa. We developed a connect with each other when she was delighted to write the foreword for my book on Meneses Braganza. I had begun my research with the aim that by the time I completed, nobody else should know more about my subject than me. I believe that only when that happens, the weight of one's PhD thesis is validated. I soon realized that Mrs. Couto was the only person in Goa who understood my subject in the depth that learning and research warranted. She truly deserved to chair the public talks that I was invited to deliver at prestigious public spaces, be it at the inaugural lecture series of the Institute Meneses Braganza, in the presence of the then Governor S.C. Zamir, and also at my very first public exposition of my research findings after being awarded PhD degree at the History Hour of the Xavier Center. Father has already mentioned to you the line that instilled confidence in me throughout my life. It validated more confidence in me than I ever imagined. Thereafter, she mentored me and was a strong shoulder that I could lean on in my academic journey. Mrs. Couto and Cleofato, were mutual admirers of each other's writings. They enjoyed just talking to each other, and the subject of their discussions were always Goa, Goa, and Goa. It was clear that she enjoyed reading his newspaper writings, as his views were as opinionated as hers. We always teased her that her South Goa frame was limited to Margao, Lotoli, Raya, and Benauli. Without even realizing the caste innuendo, she would spontaneously reply that these were the only three villages that she was connected to in her childhood. Even as a child, she was a keen observer, much of which is reflected in her books. I am appalled, therefore, when she was accused as an elitist and casteist writer during her lifetime. The spontaneous outpour of grief and tributes from all over India show her not only as Goa's but also India's daughter, and also show her national standing. I always appreciated her language, both spoken and written. I once asked her how she found the right words at the right time to express the right feelings. She very humbly would say, it comes automatically once you are a postgraduate in English and deliver lectures in English literature. I know that it was not so easy as she implied. It was a cultivated choice of words that she used and words that she played with in her writings. Mr. Shetty will throw more light on this. Women as pure as Aurora are born once in many decades. Her spirit will remain alive through her magnificent work for a better Goan culture and ethos. Of the words that she always used, Vegarens Munispon and Goinkarpon, that she herself so epitomized and represented. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shushila, for your sharing. And now possibly we'll try to go back to Dr. Manohar Shetty. I believe he has got his now got his connection better. So Dr. Manohar Shetty.
Mr. Manohar Shetty, kindly put your video on and unmute yourself.
So to put it off on.
Put it on.
Okay,
on.
Mr. Manohar, you're perfect now. Your audio is on and your video is on. So continue. Yes.
Okay. Yes, as I said, that Aurora, an author, Graham Greene, whom Aurora knew personally and hosted him in a house in Aldona. But the other two books, Goa, A Daughter's Story, and Philomena's Journey, a portrait of a family and a culture, I have read with great interest. Both are intimately autobiographical in nature. Philomena's Journey is a testimony to the grit and courage of her mother, who moved from a village Raya to the bustle of Margao. Her father, Shiko, a talented musician she married who died an untimely death. Philomena was compelled to move with the young children to Dharwad in Karnataka. With the little income she had from students to whom she rented out rooms and some meager earnings from her landholdings, she raised all her 7 children, including Aurora. She lived to the ripe old age of 90, being taken care of by her daughter. Goa, A Daughter's Story, can be considered a sequel or a prequel to Philomena's journey, as it was published more than 10 years before Philomena. A Daughter's Story is not just the story of a daughter. It takes in its stride the long and often turbulent history of Goa under 450 years of Portuguese domination, the struggle for liberation and the personalities involved, and the social and economic changes post-liberation. Besides her relationship with her husband, Alban Couto, among the first IAS officers posted in Goa, Aurora writes eloquently on post-liberation Goa, to quote her, 450 years of Portuguese colonial domination had cut Goa off from India. Disappearing frontiers had brought exhilaration, but also a sense of foreboding. She confesses, "The child of Goa, I felt at home, yet worlds away, as a family had lived in Karwar since 1945. India and Goa have become indivisible to me," she writes. "I belong to both worlds, but they did not seem to be integrated in those around me in that initial period after liberation." She writes eloquently on Nehru's dilemma on whether to use force to liberate Goa and the dictatorship of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, which lasted for over 4 decades. Who, as Aurora puts it, extinguished the spark in Goan culture and Goan cultural life, the spirit of intellectual inquiry and political debate. But the book also speaks eloquently on the achievements of common Goan citizens in the fields of medicine, engineering, and other occupations post-liberation. In fact, post-liberation, Goa soon became a model state to be emulated by other regions in the country. In 2003, Goa was named the best in the country. Aurora concludes the book with the remarks, "I have tried to unravel the challenges faced by our ancestors across the centuries. The attempts to safeguard tradition, absorb new ways, and the complex experience that has gone into the making of modern Goan society. In this, she has been more than successful. It has been a great privilege to have known Aurora for so many years." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shetty, for your sharing and for your very personal remembrances of Dr. Aurora.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We move on to the next speaker is Mr. Datta Naik. Mr. Datta Naik is a graduate in economics and statistics and has completed a number of management courses at the IIM Ahmedabad. Mr. Datta Naik is a businessman, perhaps known to some of you because he is a businessman here in Goa. And he's also the CEO of KDN Group, which has wide interests in logistics, retail, and above all in housing in the South particularly. He has written several books in Konkani and also in Marathi, and more recently for children in English. He says, my association with Dr. Maria Aurora Couto is for the last 20 years. When we were, he remembers, members of the D.D. Kosambi Centenary Committee, and they had worked together at that time. Later on, he also recalls that I had again another opportunity to work with Dr. Maria Couto when both of us were members of the executive committee of the Goa University. I was deeply impressed by Maria's quality of head and heart. She was firm in her convictions, he says, but used to express her opinions always in a very humble manner. With these few remembrances of Dr. Maria, I invite now Mr. Datta Naik to speak himself.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Sometimes I pose a question to myself. When we are in public life, at the end of the day, what we gain? And then I find the answer in public life to come across friends like Maria Aurora Couto. When I think of Maria Aurora Couto, I necessarily think about her spouse, Alban Couto. And when I think of their relationship, Alban Bab and Maria Bai, I'm reminded of Khalil Gibran's sentence, let there be spaces in our togetherness. So they were together, but yet they had kept spaces for each other to breathe and to dance. There are a number of books she has written, Daughter's Story, Philomena's Journey, but I think the best book she has written is her life itself. I find something mythical about when I used to look at her. I used to find something mythical about her. She was a myth by herself. And I used to find that she's just not a human being, but personification of mother deity. I used to see a mother image in her. She was very simple, transparent. She was very soft speaking, but yet she was very firm in her convictions. Whenever she used to disagree, she was not disagreeing with the person. She was disagreeing with the views of the person. As I recollect her memories, we were together in D.D. Kosambi Centenary Committee. She was chairperson, I was member, and we decided a lecture series in name of D.D. Kosambi. But the title, most appropriate title, was suggested by Mariappa. It is Festival of Ideas. It is nothing but Festival of Ideas. And she used to say, Goa will lack intellectually stimulating atmosphere. And that is what we should create. You know, there are two types of infrastructures. One is physical infrastructure, bridges, roads, electricity, and so on. But there is cultural infrastructure, and she was wanting this cultural infrastructure in Goa to be built. Again, we were in the EC, Executive Committee of Goa University, and both of us, to tell you frankly, were fed up of Executive Committee because we wanted to contribute something about learning or education, but the whole meeting of EC, which used to last 2-3 hours, was only about administrative matters, disputes and allowances and so on. I got fed up. I resigned. Maria Bai also did attain further this. It was a very bad experience because we wanted to contribute. Maria Bai wanted to contribute. She used to say, there's a value for money, but there is a greater value for your time. There is a principle she told me, which I was not aware. She coined a word called roti, return on investment, on time invested, return on time invested. So she was very good in time management. That's why she could write so much things, so much she could read. So she said, Datta, if you don't have proper time management, you can't be author. And I took her advice and started to do time management myself. She was very highly educated, but she never carried her high profile image with her. If you look at her, she would have been any other next door lady. She never, she was never arrogant. She was never high profile. She was very, very simple. And I think that simplicity, which is matters. The whole society today has become a very arrogant. I find everywhere people have become arrogant. We need simple people like Maria Aurora Couto, and that is what is very important to me. Whenever I think of my friend, dear friend Maria Aurora Couto, I think one virtue I would like to take and would like others to take is simplicity. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Datta Naik, for that sharing, so personal and also so reflective. We move on now to our final speaker of this evening, Mr. Vivek Meneses. Mr. Vivek Meneses is a widely published writer and photographer and co-founder and co-curator of the Goa Arts Literature Festival. He says to me when I asked him about his connections with the Couto family and with Dr. Maria, he says, my family and Auroras have been connected from the middle of the last century in Dharwad, and I have followed her work closely for 3 decades. And so now we invite Mr. Vivek Meneses to share some of his personal remembrances and reflections.
Thank you, Father Tony, and thank you to the J.F.R. for hosting this event. I didn't know that the Couto collection of books is at your institution, but I'm glad it's there. I remember her researching there 15, 16 years ago and taking good use of the library. I'd also like to, since I have the privilege of going last, I've listened to everyone. I wanted to say how much I enjoyed the other speakers. Some excellent insights I found from Shreya about obviously the grandmother that she had, but also it was visible to Shreya how hard her grandmother worked all along. And I thought that was very nice. I also like the similarly human touch from Sunita, who also shared that lovely anecdote about the couple observing each other, which was very nice. Datta shared this wonderful acronym of ROTI, which I think is a nice one. Return on time invested. I definitely think of life that way as well. But this acronym, which is very useful, we can attribute to Ms. Couto. And of course, Manohar has read Goan writing so closely of Manohar over the course of the last few decades. So I appreciated that analysis. I myself, as was mentioned, sometime in the 1950s, and when Aurora Figueiredo was in her early teens, she moved to Dharwad, as was mentioned by a couple of the speakers, and at that time she joined school along with my beloved Veena family of sisters, some brothers as well, joined the school along with my beloved aunts. So it has been a very long family connection. My father grew up there as well, knowing obviously Aurora's entire family and quite closely. So we've known them for that long, but I started paying attention to Ms. Couto sometime in the late 80s when I started to read both Indian literature as well as the critical establishment in the West, and I was delighted to see that there was a name like Aurora Maria Couto at that time, writing in places like the Times Literary Supplement. So it's a very long relationship, but today is significant because it's in her passing. I will officially stop calling her auntie as I had to in her own life, and refer to her in a way that I probably would never have had the temerity to do in her own lifetime, which is as Couto. So let's talk about Couto, and I'd like to talk about Couto in both as a literary person and also look at her as a critic and as a cultural figure. I think that when it comes to literature, Manohar has spoken, and this is a record. And Sunita mentioned some of the controversies, like for instance, some people have called Ms. Couto casteist, and also there are other, this is a public record which people will pass judgments on. I think one of the things that is less pointed out when we talk about these two books, two very fine books, A Daughter's Story and Philomena's Journey, is that they actually fit into a well-established genre of letters which comes out of Goa and dates probably certainly into the 19th century, the late 19th century. But there are many good examples in the 20th century, and I think you have to see the book in that kind of as part of that genre. I actually set aside a couple of others just to give you an example of other books in this, and this is Remo's book actually, which is again, it is a biographical story, but it's very biographical, but it is also a cultural history of our times, and a very good one. And this is Fitz D'Souza's book. Fitz was a great bridge figure between Kenya and India. And the thing about both of these is that, and you can see here how Aurora's book is more literary, obviously, and treated because she was a student of literature. Remo is more of a showman, and this book unfolds as a kind of series of cameos. And Fitz was a brilliant lawyer, so his work is off the record. The reason I mention this is the best way, I think, to understand the literature, and I think that history is going to judge. I personally like both the books very much. They are, I think, important in one other way, which is that the books that I showed you, and almost all the books we have, the kind of personal histories with the memoir genre, which expands to personal, cultural, social, intellectual histories of Goa. They're almost all, written by, virtually all that I can think of. There's one maybe by, I think, Imelda Tavora, maybe her last name, but which is in English, but which is by a woman, but most of the others are by men. And there is definitely something about Aurora Couto which separates herself from in this genre, and I think it should be acknowledged as such early, and then scholars can write about this later as well. I think that because there's a notable lack of rancor. There is a kind of setting the story straight, which connects all of these books, but there is she definitely also is discreet, but I think that there is a kind of a directness in her approach which is refreshing, and I really think that is an important aspect of her literary contributions. I think that this may also, in some ways, to be fair, it probably it may soften the impact of some of what she writes about, because a lot of times in her book, particularly in Philomena's Journey, you can see her kind of wanting to do justice to the story, but also struggling with the sentiments of her siblings and the rest of her family. So it's an interesting duality. It plays out tension that plays out in the book, and I think that's one of the reasons that makes them compelling. I think as a thinker, Couto was really quite kaleidoscopic. She had quite a range to her, and also, in a way that she had a fluidity to her character. Some of the ways that some of our other speakers today, Shreya is understandable. She's a granddaughter, but The other speakers sometimes describe the Couto who I don't recognize myself, and I met her a lot. And obviously the way I would describe her would not necessarily be identical. So I think that that's not entirely uncommon. That kind of fluidity to the character, the multi kind of faceted nature or to their character is the nature of the Goans in general. It's also the nature of a survivor in other ways. But it does display, she had an uncommon kind of mastery of these multiple spheres, an ability to move fluidly between them, which I think is something really interesting. Part of that may date back to Dharwad, where people lived in different worlds. There was, the Goan Catholic world, there was the world of school, you had the worlds of different, you had almost ghettoized communities, almost all of which were Brahmin or upper caste, but these ghettoized communities where you had friendships across ostensible religious barriers, but not necessarily across class or caste barriers. So it's a very interesting background which she stayed loyal to and developed to an unusual level. I would say these skills. Even my family is full of people from Dharwad, but Couto was a little unusual. The main thing that I'm happy to be able to play witness to, be a witness to, which seems to have been forgotten in a lot of the ways Couto is being remembered, particularly here in this setting where we're hearing, actually heard the words Goa, 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 she was all about Goa, is that Couto had different phases in her life. One of them when she was teaching, of course, Goa was omnipresent in her character and who she is, but so was Dharwad. And she had this period of many years, over a decade, I think maybe 15 or 16 years, teaching at LSR, which is very important to understand. And then in the 80s, starting I think in somewhere around 1981, she was an extreme rarity in the Western media in that she was reading and writing about Indian books. And this is one of the ways in which cultural history, it's true in many other aspects of particularly Goan cultural history, it's one of the ways in which our cultural history is almost amnesiac. It seems people find it almost hard to believe that just 25 or 30 years ago, there were very few Indian writers writing in English who were being published in the West. And even they had very few readers. They had very low advances. They were all struggling. In that milieu of these young writers emerging and writing their first books to kind of mixed acclaim, people like Amitav Ghosh and Vikram Seth and Salman, notably Salman Rushdie, but even Shashi Deshpande, all had their first serious reviews in the Western critical establishment, and then quite often the first India review in her ongoing column for the Indian Express, which for Dom Marias's culture section, it was by Maria Couto. So it's a very fascinating contribution, an important contribution, and I think that is something that, in terms of the historical record, is I think something which she will be eventually known as, just as much as all of these other wonderful aspects to her career and Goa. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vivek. That was both personal, this family connection that you highlighted, as well as the analytical remarks that you made from the literary perspective. Thank you very much. We have now reached the end of our little program of the evening, and I feel very glad to thank all of you that you took trouble to really put these thoughts together in a manner that leaves something behind for all of us to take home, to reflect upon, and to improve upon. That was the great dream of Dr. Maria Couto, that a new generation should come along and this project should be carried forward. And I think this is a small effort of Xavier Center. And now that we have a collection with us here at the Xavier Center, hopefully we'll get young scholars from the university, and you can encourage scholars to come here and do some research so that we, as Vivek correctly said, we carry this cultural tradition forward and don't allow it to stagnate, so to speak. With these few words, I thank all of you for being present. I thank all of you for your contributions. And I would like to invite Father Malcolm now to close this session because we are just 3 minutes away from closing time.
Okay, thank you, Father Tony. On behalf of the Xavier Center of Historical Research, I would like to thank the speakers, namely Ms. Shreya Pinto the Andrade, Mr. Manohar Shetty, Professor Shushila Mendes, Mr. Datta Naik, and Mr. Vivek Meneses for your words of great appreciation, insights, knowledge, and love towards dear Maria Aurora Couto. Thank you for taking time in paying honor and respects to Maria Aurora Couto. I would like to thank Father Anthony da Silva, the director of the Xavier Center of Historical Research, for chairing the history hour. Lastly, I would like to thank each one of you for participating in this history hour in honoring Maria Aurora Couto. I would request each one of us to continue to keep the family of Maria Aurora Couto in prayers, and that we may pray that God may bless them abundantly. So I would like to say, God bless you all. Thank you and have a good night. God bless.